Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Lifelong Learning Committee. I know there's been a bit of a rapid turnaround after the IJB, so apologies for the furniture removal at the start of the meeting, but we look like we're all set up now. Few housekeeping notes. If the fire alarm sounds, everyone should leave the building using the nearest emergency exit. Please can everybody participating in the meeting use their microphones and check that your phone or tablet, etc. is on silent. And after today's meeting, the meeting's been recorded and it'll be available on YouTube, fingers crossed, given the technological problems we've been having. It'll be available for viewing after the meeting. I'd like to welcome Mr Charlton and Mr Gowrie to your first official meetings with us. You're very welcome. Andy Charlton, who is well known to all of us, representing the secondary school parents, and Martin Gowrie representing the primary school parents. You're both very welcome and we look forward to your contributions. Quite nice to see everybody all in one section of the meeting today instead of in the separate rows, so hopefully everybody will feel able to contribute. Can I ask if there's any apologies or substitutions for today's meeting?
Convener, we have apologies from Mrs Macaulay, Mrs Weston, Jack Bell, Dean McBride and Councillor Purvis.
Thank you. Can I ask if there's any declarations of interest in respect of the business on today's agenda? Nope. Thank you. Moving on to the minutes of previous meetings, we have the minute of the meeting of the Lifelong Learning Committee of the 4th of September. Can we agree to note the minute? I'd like to just bring up one matter which I know has been a discussion among elected members and others, and that's in relation to item 425 about the School Estate Transformation Programme at Lochrie High School and the Highland Perthshire Learning Partnership. There's been a bit of discussion about the timescales for bringing back the report for that, and I'd like to ask Sheena if she's any comment about the timescales for bringing back an action plan, just for clarification for members.
Thank you, Convener. What was resolved at committee on the 4th of September was that we would bring back a report on the scoping exercise, and we are on track to be able to do that. The scoping exercise in itself would not necessarily predetermine all that might then follow in relation to the Highland Perthshire Learning Partnership, so we are on track.
Thank you for that. Is that satisfactory? Thank you. I'll sign the minutes. Thank you. Can we also agree to note the minute of the meeting of the Executive Subcommittee of 19th of August and note the minute of the meeting of the Joint Negotiating Committee for Teaching Staff of the 18th of June? Thank you. Item 4 is, can we agree to note the minute of the meeting of the Children, Young People and Families Partnership of the 14th of June? Thank you. And that takes us on to paper 5. The Attainment and Pupil Equity Funding Update 2019, and I'm going to invite Sheena Devlin to introduce the report.
Thank you, Convener. This report provides a 2019 progress update on attainment and also closing the poverty-related attainment gap, as well as including information about how our schools have been using their pupil equity funding. It presents information on a range of measures designed to both improve performance and monitor progress of those improvements, which are presented fully in Appendix 1 and summarised also in the executive summary. It meets our Council's requirements in statute to report on the National Improvement Framework for Education. We also have an infographic which provides a visual summary of the headline information, and that will be made available to all elected members.
I'll just ask committee services to circulate it, and then you can maybe have a minute or two to have a look at it. Okay, thank you for that. I certainly find these infographics really helpful, and they're particularly helpful when you're going to parent council meetings, etc., and you've got some sort of key stats at your fingertip, and I can promise you it's a long way from 2007 and the kind of reports we got once upon a time, so it's very welcome. Thank you very much, Paul and team. Can I ask if there's any questions on the report? Councillor Simpson, Councillor Rebick and Councillor Forbes.
Thank you very much indeed, Convener. I find the tables and the graphics very helpful as to how the money was distributed and how it was spent, but I wonder, do we have any direct evidence as to the effect of the spend of PEF and attainment? Because there's presumably more to attainment than spending money. I just wonder if there's a direct correlation between how much was spent and any improvements in attainment.
Councillor Simpson, in relation to the PEF spending, you'll know that it is allocated to particular schools, and therefore we do have information, and some of that is actually referred to in the more detailed report, where through the interventions that have been planned using PEF spend to fund, there has been significant improvement in areas such as aspects of language, so literacy, reading, writing, that kind of thing as well. What we've also seen are some significant improvements in primary 4 numeracy in targeted schools as well. So there are things that we're able to point to that as a result of the interventions that PEF has supported, we are seeing an improvement in particular schools.
Councillor Rebick.
Thank you, Convener. My question really is around page 55 of the papers on health and wellbeing, because whilst literacy and numeracy will always be at the heart of Curriculum for Excellence, it does strike me that maybe a slightly unintended benefit of pupil equity funding is actually that pupils are becoming, as their literacy and numeracy improves, they're becoming healthier, happier and more well-rounded. I'm just wondering if that is if that's something which I'm right in thinking or not.
Possibly a little bit more
It's less
challenging to
definable.
measure,
I know
isn't it?
it's less definable and less able to measure, but I certainly think what's described in page 55 is very welcome. And I just wonder whether I am thinking along the right lines, that actually that health and wellbeing is also being improved by pupil equity funding.
I think if we have a look at the list of the interventions and the resources that schools have purchased using PEF, you might be able to link some of those to this. On page 55, Councillor Rebick, what we're reporting here is not just anything that might have been based on any intervention that was PEF funded, but on a more holistic range of interventions that come through the Emotional Wellbeing Collaborative or the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative, or indeed through our own health and wellbeing strategy, which was one of the 3 strategies recently launched with all head teachers. And so to find a direct correlation between that spend, I think we would need to do a bit closer scrutiny, but it's something that we could probably look at. Where in terms of mental health and wellbeing, we're thinking about physical and emotional mental health and wellbeing, and of course the ongoing intervention in relation to programmes like Bounce Back, we know does have a significant programme in terms of young people's sense of worth and confidence.
Thank you for that answer. I think the interventions are welcome wherever they come from, and it's really pleasing to see such good work as well. So thank you for that answer.
Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Convener. I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. One's, I think, dead simple, and it's regarding the infographic. I just wonder if someone could tell me what the virtual comparator is.
In relation to how we gauge our performance, previously, Councillor Forbes, there were identified local authorities who, for some purposes, it is appropriate for us to compare ourselves against because their demographic and their profile is very similar to Perth and Kinross, but the virtual comparator is a probably more accurate and precise tool, and that is by school basis across Scotland. Schools with similar characteristics can be compared against those most like themselves. That's fundamentally what it is. It's part of the insight tool that all schools across Scotland use. So they have that ability to look at their performance in itself, and then their performance relative to all those other schools in a grouping most similar to themselves.
Thank you, Convener. Section 3.4 is regarding the PEF funding that said head teachers are permitted to use their discretion in making decisions about which children and young people would benefit most. Can we get maybe just one example of what that might actually be on the ground in real life?
There's some examples in the more detailed report where I'm looking for the particular paper. Sharon can maybe point me to, but I remember there's a couple of case studies. There's one on page
46 and
case
one on
study
page 51.
case study 2 on page 46 that would give you some examples there. So, for example, the case study 2 on page 46 is looking at a dip in attainment in P4 writing and the approach that was taken there and what the impact was thereafter.
Councillor Povar.
Thanks very much, Convener. It's just a point of clarification at section 3.7. 5 schools did not receive funding, and I just wonder, is that because of low pupil numbers or for any other reason?
It's purely because there were no pupils in the school who met the criteria for the awarding of PEF funding, but it didn't mean that they went without, because there has been money made available through Perth Kinross Council for any school that didn't. The other thing just to say, Councillor Pover, is that a number of schools have taken an approach where they've used some of their PEF in their own school, but they've also, across a local management group of schools, undertaken some joint work, and therefore if there were schools who hadn't specifically received any funding in that context, they may well have benefited from that collective approach.
Just a wee supplementary, can I just ask if the amounts are similar that was awarded to the Pupil Equity Fund, the amounts that are actually ordered from other funding?
It wouldn't be like for like, it would be based on schools bidding in for that support if they wanted it.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Clearly, PEF's a great thing. My question would be that obviously areas is looked at, and if there's areas that are seen that require PEF funding, that's allocated to the schools. If there's a cohort of children ask for placement, does the PEF move with them to the other schools, or does the PEF sit with the school that they're supposed to be at?
The PEF funding is allocated once a year, and it's based on a point in time on the school role at that time. So the allocation would be made based on whatever was the cut-off date, if you like, Councillor Anderson, for that allocation. It would then be very difficult to track between schools, between local authorities incoming, so that there's a point in time that the allocation is made, and that's what it is for that year.
Thank you for that.
Any further questions? Councillor McEwen and...
Thank you, Convener. We currently use the 7 quartiles to describe our children at school, but also note within the papers the mention of another measure of deprivation, the ACORN measure, and I can't find it in the papers, but I'm sure I read that it said that children in more rural locations, that the ACORN measure is more accurate for their assessment and separation into different groups. Are we using both measures so that, because since we have such a rural ward, rural council with lots of rural areas, are we using both measures so that children aren't falling through?
The SIMD is a measure that's used nationally, and in Perth and Kinross for a number of years now we have preferred to use ACORN, because we feel that not just in the context of rural, but importantly in that context, but not just because of that, it gives a more accurate picture of the factors of deprivation that may affect different localities. So it's not purely because of the rural aspect, although that is important, but we feel that you get a far better, more nuanced picture that is more informative for our purposes.
And that's part of our assessment going forward.
It's something that we've been using for a number of years, Councillor McEwen, and we'll continue to do that. And I know that Paul Davidson from our performance and improvement team is was the person who brought ACORN to us, if you like, a number of years ago, and it's certainly something that Paul raises nationally in the various groups that he sits on as well. It's as I say, it's a much more nuanced tool than perhaps something like the SIMD or indeed using free meal entitlement on their own.
Mr Ferguson.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Just a question regarding the infographics. On the far right-hand side, it says poverty-related gaps closing for early stages, but stubborn for later ones. What would the main reason be for it being more difficult to close that gap for later stages?
You ask a very good question, and there's often never just a simple, straightforward answer to questions like that. I think that there's probably several parts to an answer there, Mr Ferguson. One would be around that we're seeing where we can get in early and catch situations before they have become embedded or entrenched, then the earlier intervention, the better. But what we also see then as youngsters perhaps get older, that some interventions may take a lot longer to have effect, because what we're trying to do is redress learned behaviours or habits or that kind of thing. So that can make that much more challenging. And we also know that in engagement with young people directly and their responsiveness to various interventions can change as they get older and decide for themselves whether or not they want to engage with those or not. So that there would be a range of different reasons, but it doesn't mean that we don't persist. And we would like to think that the more we can put in further down the stream, if you like, we will begin to see that benefit more and more young people as they move throughout their schooling in Perth and Kinross.
And Councillor Baird.
Thank you very much, Convener. My question is relating to active schools activities. According to the report, this has somewhat dipped in some areas due to staffing issues. Is this purely staffing issues, or is it volunteer parents not wishing to volunteer as much?
I think, Sharon, when we discussed this very point, you had the answer to that, so I'll ask Sharon Johnson to provide the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baird. We were confused when this report first came through, because we've got very good data from our active schools coordinators that in fact our participation rates have increased, and we've got a number of projects within many of our schools where we've actually seen an increase in participation of under 10s within girls groups and children with additional support needs. So we looked at this quite carefully to understand that dip, and although it says staffing issues, what we've discovered on further investigation is that those activities themselves and the children who participated in those activities actually remained the same and improved. The staffing issue was a staff who went off sick, who didn't record the activities, and therefore it's actually a recording issue and not a participation measure.
Councillor Starwar.
Thank you. It was really just a follow-up question about the stubborn gaps, and I found the comment really interesting about how hopefully we'll be able to track as people go through the system that have experienced PEF and all of these measures. But have we able to identify any measures that would be able to help bring around maybe some short-term changes for those at the older end of school? I'm thinking of things like mentoring or work experience.
There is a Frederick Douglass quote that says that it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men, and I think fundamentally that's what I was trying to say, Councillor Sarwar, in response to Mr Ferguson's question, that the earlier interventions that you can put in, that then the stronger and more robust and more resilient hopefully those youngsters will be, and that will continue in a sustainable way. But in terms of specific interventions, because interventions needn't always be early, but they may come at an appropriate time in any young person's time at school. And we do have mentoring in place for some young people, and we know that that can actually have a really significant effect on young people's self-worth, self-belief, their whole attitude, and a range of other really important aspects of their life, both whether that's in a school, another place of learning, or in society more generally. We are currently seeking out to tender, I should say, for a wide-scale mentoring support programme to support, and it would be older young people.
No further questions? No. I'll go on and move the report. I think the level of questioning is reflects an element of the scale of the paper, and I really would urge any elected members and others to go and visit some of our schools, where you'll hear from head teachers themselves of the work that's ongoing. It kind of contextualises the PEF fund beyond what's written in the report. This is a very detailed report outlining how pupil equity funding is being used to boost learning among disadvantaged pupils across Perth and Kinross. Our administration welcomes all efforts to empower head teachers who we believe know their schools and their pupils best. The challenge is to tackle the ongoing gaps in learning for children and young people, and that must remain a core objective for all of us. It's clear in the report that improvements are being seen, but that many of these challenges still remain, and it's encouraging to hear about work being done, particularly in that older stage in secondary school. An evidence-based approach remains essential if we are to ensure that our resources are being targeted in the right way. And I would once again pay tribute to, and I saw him squeezing in the front row in case he was getting asked any questions, but to Paul Davidson and his team, who have, that we're really fortunate within ECS to have them there digging right into all of the available data to ensure that our decisions and those of head teachers are well informed. Certainly a transformation, I think, in the way that the council uses data in the time that a number of us have been councillors, and we would certainly hope that that will continue into the future, because we're actually seeing the value of that in the way that interventions can be made to make lives better for children and young people. So with those comments, I'll move the report and ask Councillor Duff to second.
Thank you, Convener. This is a very helpful report which outlines the general trend of improvement against key milestones for areas such as literacy, numeracy, reading, writing, listening and talking. It also highlights the allocation and expenditure of pupil equity funds across our schools. The table on pages 76 and 77 shows the wide range of initiatives to which head teachers have allocated PEF monies so far in an effort to further improve the performance of pupils from more disadvantaged backgrounds. In general, attainment continues to rise at a steady pace, and there are early indications that the attainment gap between the most and least advantaged is closing. However, there are a number of results, particularly in relation to literacy and numeracy, which show a stubborn and persistent resistance to the same levels of improvement despite the application of PEF monies, and we will continue to prioritise the strategies for addressing these. There are welcome signs of continued improvement in a number of other areas, for example, senior phase attainment, outcomes for looked after children, and in school leaver destinations and participation of 16 to 19-year-olds in education, training or employment, which are both well above the national average. However, there continue to be a number of other ongoing challenges, for example, in areas such as exclusions and school attendance. I welcome the report and commend the efforts of all those involved in addressing the matters reported within. Thanks to the officers for putting the report together. And finally, I note the development of an updated raising attainment strategy for 2020 to 23 and look forward to seeing that in due course. I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Can I ask if there's any comments on the report? Councillor Ribbick.
Thank you again, Convener. I think there can be no doubt that pupil equity funding has been a successful and innovative Scottish Government policy that has already reduced the attainment gap in Perth and Kinross across literacy and numeracy, and I do believe actually that health and well-being of our pupils has been made better by it, albeit the work comes from many different sources. There is still much work to do, and many of the reasons that we have an attainment gap, as alluded to by Adrian's question, are stubborn, complex and have existed for many generations. And so it is vital and important that we continue in our efforts to get it right for every child if I may say that. And to that end, I sincerely hope that pupil equity funding continues long beyond the Scottish Parliament elections of 2021. But like any well-meaning and innovative policy, it means nothing if it's not implemented with vigour and intent. And it's really important today that we do pay tribute to our head teachers who implement it in very imaginative ways. And in answer to Councillor Forbes' question, if I may, any parent councils that I go to, and I attend all the ones in my ward regularly, the head teachers are frequently challenged and questioned on their use of pupil equity fund by parents as much as elected members, and I'm never ceased to be amazed by the imaginative and effective ways that this money is used. So it is important we pay tribute to our teachers and their deputies and their staff who are all involved in implementing what is a great policy, and we're delighted to commend this report. Thank you.
Just to say that I was speaking since John's Academy was mentioned specifically in the report, I took upon myself to speak to the head teacher, Sean Hagney, and to my direct question about health and well-being, he was nodding his head vigorously, and I have a whole list which I won't read out of. I says, well, what have you been doing with the money? It is a staggering, and they are very grateful, by the way, for the handsome contribution that they get. And the stuff they've been doing with it is absolutely amazing. So I think this is a success story which has to be underlined. Convener, thank you.
Thank you very much. I really would encourage members to go and speak to, and I'm sure officers could direct you in you know, to which schools you would see some really good, clear examples of the difference it's making. Any further comments? No? Can we agree the report? Thank you. Which takes us on to paper 6, and I'll hand over to Councillor Duff.
Thank you. Paper 6, Education and Children's Services Interim Performance Summary for 2019, and I'll invite Mrs Devlin to introduce the report.
Thank you, Vice Convener. This report provides an overview of progress against the priorities that were set out in the Service Business Management and Improvement Plan for the period since April 2019. It highlights, by exception, where performance targets have been exceeded or where the service is not on track to meet targets, and includes improvement actions where necessary. This is a good report showing continued progress in delivering positive outcomes and improved services. A full annual report with detailed progress against all the BMIP targets and actions will be presented at the end of the reporting year.
Thank you. Are there any questions in the report?
Thanks very much, Vice Convener. Just in relation to page 91 of the report, and it refers to the family change. And I just wondered, I'm absolutely delighted that the family change has been set up to support vulnerable children. And I just wonder, given that there is 25 children being supported, is that due to increase, or will it only be limited to relatively small numbers of children?
Thank you. This is a very small team of staff with very specialised skills in therapeutic work. Although they deal with a small number of children, as you've pointed out, Councillor Pover, much of their work is about consultation and supporting staff across a wider range of services to support children. So it's a very small team. There's no plans to increase that at this point in time. But what we are looking at is how we can complement the work that they do, along with the additional investment in school counselling, for example. So it's about ensuring that there's a seamless approach for children. At this point in time, there's no intention to increase that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I too am looking at page 91, and I note the strapline particularly. Those of you who've been paying attention over the years will know I never like to miss an opportunity to bang on about active travel. And I just wondered if both this strategy and the toolkit referred to in paragraph 6 mean that we are doing our best to encourage kids to walk, cycle and scoot to school. It says the advantage, sorry, I'll be as quick as I can, that this is the advantage of being free. It takes place out with school time and may not even require too many resources. That there is no downside to active travel. It would improve the appalling air quality around schools. People's jeeps are revving while they drop their kids off. And I think it would be sending out the right message to everyone if we ensured that active travel was promoted as much as possible. There are a number of international studies available that the kids who walk, scoot and cycle to school perform better than those who get a lift from mum. So I think it's something we should be making sure we promote. And I've fashioned this into a question quickly now. Could I have an assurance from officers that we are doing this?
The short answer is you can have that assurance, Councillor Simpson, that we do promote continuously, and not just within Education and Children's Services, but through a whole means of other partners and agencies, work with Sustrans and other departments as well to ensure that there are safe routes for youngsters to walk or cycle or go on their scooters to. A number of different parent councils over the piece will organise walking buses and take it in turns to volunteer to escort larger groups of children on foot to school. And we know from the banners that hang on the railings outside a number of our schools that not only is active travel pursued in a very positive and rigorous way, but so too is the encouragement from those schools, from the young people, from the parent councils, for cars not to be parked near the schools as well. So absolutely it is ongoing and something that we're continually looking at different and creative ways to help support our schools with.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question relates to page 98 and it's to do with unauthorised absence. From reading the paragraph in the centre of the table, I'm guessing that this refers to parents who decide to take their children out of school to go on a slightly cheaper holiday than maybe the case during the summer. Am I correct in that? And I wonder, do we categorise different types of absence? So we could, for example, find out if a child was genuinely ill or was just off on holiday.
If a child was off ill, then that would be an authorised absence if the child was unable to attend. And within the category of unauthorised absence, there are different subcategories of that. And sometimes it is about holidays and term time, but there are other classifications linked to the unauthorised aspect. So it wouldn't solely be linked to that, Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Back to page 91, I'm afraid. With the Emotional Wellbeing Collaborative, I had the good fortune of being at the sort of final session, little graduating service that they had for the group at Cooper Angus Primary School. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about that collaborative and how it's being rolled out across the piece. Because it was very encouraging.
It's not something I know more detail about, but I'm looking to see if Sharon or perhaps Jill Dugan does yet.
Thank you. The Emotional Wellbeing Collaborative has been around in Perth and Kinross for probably about 3 years, and it's moved and changed and I think improved over those 3 years, where really we started off with an opportunity for schools and community groups to come together to look at projects to support well-being in very small projects. And the reason for that was that we wanted to just grow a community, if you like, of particular interventions that were making a difference. And so we started off very small and we looked at resilience and health and well-being amongst children. And over the last 3 years, we've seen a real benefit to that collaborative, whereby we're now able to look at particular interventions around resilience, which has actually impacted on PEF spend, for instance. So where we've had some small projects through the Emotional Wellbeing Collaborative, people have been able to demonstrate the impact of some interventions that has demonstrated a bigger impact. So for instance, the Blairgowrie LMG Local Management Group had a number of small projects in relation to emotional well-being, and they took on an LMG approach where they used some of their PEF spend to look at growth mindset to build resilience in children, and then moved on from that to look at the whole well-being of communities. And the Emotional Wellbeing Collaborative is continuing to track that progress and to support staff to look at what the interventions are that are making the difference. And one of the things that we need to do better within that approach is to look at how to measure interventions. So a big push for us this year is to ensure that with the help of the educational psychology team, that we look at action research and the improvement methodology through the Emotional Wellbeing Collaborative, so that where we are making differences and changes to the way that we approach wellbeing, we know that one intervention is helping and perhaps another one isn't. So we've had a lot of success with that, and that has been taken forward through the Tayside Collaborative, where the emotional wellbeing tool has been developed. And again, through the collaborative, we'll monitor and track what difference that's making.
Okay, Councillor
Sarwar. Will the future projects be using sport in the same way, or are you looking at using different tools?
It's quite a responsive approach. It's whatever schools or communities wish to try. So what we're doing is we're looking at the best research available through the Interventions for Equity and the EEF Foundation. Any research that we find, we're sharing with schools, and then schools are choosing which aspects of those interventions might be useful for them. So the collaborative is really a place where we look at any information that we think might be useful to share, and then for schools who wish to take up that offer, then they choose that. As a result of the active schools intervention, though, in Cooper Angus, we've had 9 additional schools who have taken up that same project, and they want to take that forward.
Okay, are there any further questions? Councillor Baird.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. I'm on page 92. It's about parental involvement and engagement. I see the national survey, and only 9% of parents of children responded. I mean, do you think that is a good response, or do you feel that this is showing that parents really are not as involved as maybe they think they should be?
Thank you, Councillor Baird. I also would like to apologise before I answer that question, because on reading this report again most closely, I see that there is a Y missing from the end of survey. So I do apologise in relation to that. Your question links to that very sentence. There's different ways to interpret a 9% return, and sometimes you can rightfully consider that low response rate can be tacit approval for what's going on, and there tends to be a view that sometimes people only get involved if there's something that they're not happy about. So 9% is not great, but that was 9% response to the national survey. And I think what's more important is the information perhaps that we gather locally, or that is gathered, for example, when every school is inspected, there's a parental survey and there are questions about engagement and engagement with schools and learning there. And we see very high returns in relation to those surveys and to the surveys that we undertake here, and we feel that that gives us good and probably better information that helps us work with parents and shape input. We've also got a couple of parents who are sitting now on Lifelong Learning Committee who also attend our meetings that we have with our Parent Council chairs, and that's another means by which we do seek to engage with the wider parent body and often ask for help and support and ideas and advice from that group of parents as well. So we're not concerned by that 9% return rate, because we feel we do have good information that better reflects the local position.
Are there any further questions on the report? No? Okay, well, I shall proceed to move it. Convener, I'm pleased to move the report on the Education and Children's Services Interim Performance Summary for 2019. It highlights our performance against our Business Management Improvement Plan for the 6-month period to the 30th of September. Pleased to note there has been further increase in the number of 3 to 5-year-olds benefiting from extended hours in early learning and childcare, and that we continue to be on track for the rollout of the 1,140 hours to all eligible children for August 2020. report also highlights a number of inspection reports by Education Scotland for Cleash, Burlton, Logie and Goodleyburn Primary School, and all of which returned evaluations of satisfactory, good or very good across all quality indicators. It also provides an insight into the wide range of partnership working ongoing throughout the local authority area, with a variety of partners including the Ganachie Trust, Perth and District YMCA, youth organisations in Strathmore, Ayleth, Cooper Angus, Duke of Edinburgh's Award, Haddon Construction, Barnardo's and the Gleneagles Hotel, to name but a few. I think it's also worth mentioning the REACH project, which aims to help young people stay with their families, schools and communities, prevent the need for them to move into residential care. This work has reduced the number of our young people having to access residential placements from 27 in August 2 years ago down to 11 in August in this year, making a considerable difference to the lives of the children involved and the finances of the council. I'm also pleased to note that this council's commitment to receiving and supporting unaccompanied asylum-seeking children into our authority with care and accommodation provided for 10 so far and a further 10 to come in the next few years. National benchmarking continues to show that Perth Kinross is performing well nationally and against our virtual comparators. For example, the Care Inspectorate has conducted 7 inspections of services for children and young people in Perth Kinross. These received ratings of good or better in 88% of all quality theme gradings, compared to approximately 84% for the rest of Scotland. Convener, I'm pleased to move this very positive report covering the interim performance summary for education and children's services. Do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second. I think stolen most of the report there, Councillor Duff. If I might just pick out a couple of examples of the kind of innovative and creative work that officers in this council, working very much with elected members across the chamber, which is also very significant. The work with the Ganachie Trust, I was delighted to be at the launch event for that, and at a time when speaking to colleagues in other local authorities across the country, and I dare say we've all had those conversations, and hearing about cuts to youth work services and the pressure on these type of services, to actually see that due to creative work and partnerships that have developed over many years in Perth and Kinross, we've actually able to invest £900,000 over 3 years in youth work, which those of us out in our wards know makes a significant difference to the young people that attend them. And the other example is, of course, the REACH project, which will can only go on to deliver better and better results for the young people that engage with that, and also for the wider communities and the families of these young people. That creative, determined, innovative approach is very much the Perth and Kinross way, and something that I'm sure we're all determined to continue with. So with those comments, I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Convener. Are there any comments on the report? Councillor Rebick.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just very briefly, there was 2 big ups, one of them impromptu. Just in the active travel, I would like to mention the great work that Neil Quiney from Sustrans, who's embedded with Perth and Kinross Council, is doing on that. It has been fabulous in my ward, and I'm sure beyond, because it is really important, as Councillor Simpson points out, that we encourage kids to cycle and whatnot to school. Another thing with the 2 wheels, which I can't remember, scooter, thank you very much. But all that is really important, and I do think that Neil Quiney particularly is doing a great job on that. But I also did want to, because it's a great report, and then amongst the great report, I did also want to particularly commend the REACH project, which is fantastic and very valuable. I think as a council, we already do, but we need to continue trying to make sure all our pupils are resilient, engaged, achieving, confident and healthy. I think that's a valuable aspiration, but I particularly wanted to big up the REACH project and all of that, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rebick. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Yes, I would just like to make a comment concerning engaging with communities and surveys. I have looked into this a lot because when one gets information that surveys been done with the community, regardless of whether it's about education or whatever, and, the percentage that comes back is anything from 3% up to, this is 9%. And through doing a lot of research and actually going to presentations about engaging with the community, It seems to be, and I'm not saying it's ideal, but if everybody takes this into context, that a return of 4 or 5% is good. So therefore 9% is actually quite a good return. Obviously one would like to see more, but I think that the people involved in getting a survey and getting the results back of 9% is actually, at this moment in time, far above what other surveys are getting. So I think it should be commended that we can get that response.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Anderson. Are there any other comments? No. Can we agree the report then? Great, thank you. And back to the convener.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Paper 7 is the Carer Strategy 2019-22 for young and adult carers, a very significant and important report, and I'll ask our Executive Director to introduce it. Jackie.
No, thank you, Convener. This report presents the Carer Strategy for 2019 to 2022 for young and adult carers in Perth Kinross and seeks approval for those aspects relating to young carers by Lifelong Learning Committee this afternoon. The strategy has been developed jointly with the Health and Social Care Partnership and partners and was approved for adult carers at a meeting of the Perth Kinross IGB just this morning, and where it was noted as a step forward for carers across the local authority. The revised strategy and action plan has been devised with the views, wishes and needs of young carers at its centre. It details how the responsibilities for young carers under the Carers Scotland Act 2016 will be implemented and how the range of support for young carers is being enhanced and expanded. Young carers play a significant role in providing unseen care and keeping families together. The aim of the strategy and action plan is to identify young carers as early as possible and to provide the support they need in the most appropriate way through getting it right young carers framework for support. I would like to draw your attention to and apologise for a typo on page 101, which is the first page of the report, where it's referenced as a strategy for 2018 to 2022, and it should be 2019 to 2022, so I apologise for that. And if approved by Lifelong Learning Committee this afternoon, officers in Education and Children's Services will work with staff in Health and Social Care Partnership to ensure that there's a high-profile launch and sufficient communication of this new strategy for carers across Perth and Kinross. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll need to get our red pens back out for pre-agenda. Apologies for the typos. Can I ask if there's any questions on the report? Councillor Simpson. We're very glad to have you back, Councillor Simpson.
Oh, thank you very much. Nice to be back, Convener. Thank you. I'm not a very good advertisement for active travel today, croaking away, but I've obviously not been doing enough cycling. I have a query on page 133, paragraph 4. And wonder if we get a little bit more information. It says here, this is in connection with working with carers from ethnic minority backgrounds and so forth. And I just wonder if we can get a little bit of information what the work with them actually involves, because this is one of these occasions where we're trying to reach the hard to reach, and these are probably the most disadvantaged people already. And just to get a reassurance that we are, I don't know if we're using carer champions or doing something else to make sure we engage with these people who may be less articulate and less out there than perhaps some other members of our community.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. I certainly know that within PCAVs there is quite a focus on supporting carers within those communities, and that's an area that's been taken forward and led by our colleagues in Health and Social Care Partnership, but certainly something that we'd be working alongside them. I don't know if Hazel Robertson is able to add any further information to that, Hazel.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're working very closely with the PCAV's Carers Hub, and you will be aware that there is the minority ethnic group there. They've been very heavily involved in the consultation, and we're confident that we're reaching as many of people from different minority ethnic groups as possible at this stage, but that will continue.
Any further questions? Nope. In moving the report, I would just like to thank Jackie Pepper and her team for the dedicated role they play in improving the lives and opportunities of young carers across Perth and Kinross. I recently had the privilege of visiting PCAVs to meet with Paul Graham and Raymond Jameson to discuss this strategy before us today, but also to have a look at the developments at the new Young Carers Den at PCAVs. And if you haven't been there, there's another afternoon out for you to go and have a look at, that we were proud to support, and importantly to discuss with them ongoing improvements, again highlighting that partnership working, so that this 54-page report is more than pieces of paper, but actually a meaningful positive impact of the work being done across Perth and Kinross. I think the case study on page 117, when you can read James's story, probably contextualises what this strategy is all about, and the real people that are behind it. And I'm delighted to propose the report and look forward to future updates. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. The report obviously highlights the significant impact which having a caring role for another person can have, especially on a young carer. It's a sobering thought that we have carers as young as 6 years old in Perth and Kinross, and that the highest number of carers for any single age between 5 and 25 years of age is 14 years old. The strategy identifies both sides of the coin for a carer, the potential positives of the experience, but it also highlights, obviously, that it can have a limiting and adverse effect on health and well-being, education, relationships, and their ability to achieve their full potential in life. This is a collaborative work between the Health and Social Care Partnership and the Education and Children's Services, and I believe is a comprehensive document which clearly sets out the objectives, actions, outcomes and commitments for carers of all ages in Perth and Kinross. I'd like to express my thanks to the team for bringing this support to lifelong learning and welcome the opportunity to second the recommendations.
Thank you. Can I ask if there's any comments on the report? Councillor Rebbick.
Thank you, Convener. I just briefly like to pay tribute to the carers throughout our communities, whether they're old or young, but particularly the young carers that Councillor Duff speaks about. And I welcome the £865,000, I think it is, that the Scottish Government's funded, but I also welcome the work that we as a council have done. And this paper, again, it's a great paper. We need, as a council, we need to do as much as possible to support the carers that do great work in our community. And again, I'd just like to commend the report. Thank you.
Any further comments, or can we agree the report? Agree the report. Thank you. I'll hand back to Councillor Duff.
Thank you. Move on to paper 8, which is the policy and guidelines for admissions to early learning and childcare settings, session 2020-21, and I'd invite Mrs Devlin to introduce the report.
Thank you, Vice Convener. The report presented today outlines the updated admissions policy and guidelines for early learning and childcare settings that will be applicable from 2020, in line with the Scottish Government's expansion of funded ELC provision, which will move from providing 600 hours to 1140 hours. To enable the Council to deliver effectively on this expansion, detailed consideration has been given to where our policy and procedures should change to reflect this significant change. The report before committee reflects that review and aims to make applying for an ELC place as user-friendly as possible for parents and also for staff in the ELC settings, and to assist families with planning for work, training or study. 1140 hours in Perth and Kinross will be delivered through a blend of funded providers, including council nurseries, private and third sector partners and childminders, with a range of attendance patterns available to support parents' particular needs for their family. Application for places will be made through a centralised online system in an effort to make the process for applying from the point of applying to children being allocated places more efficient and effective for parents and staff. I should stress that the move to a centralised online system will not, however, disadvantage anybody who does not have such access. There will also be 3 points in the year for admission to early learning and childcare settings as set out in the national guidance. There's a range of staff here, including myself, who are happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions in the report? Councillor Reddick.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Am I right in thinking that we're delivering 1,140 hours already in some communities effectively?
The answer is yes, and I'll ask Sharon to come in. We've obviously been preparing for this change for some time, and some of the best way to prepare is to be to trial and to learn from some of those trials. But Sharon will have more information about that, Councillor Rebick.
Thank you, Councillor Rebick. As you know, when we set out the plan, that we had already intended to try and trial as many as we could of the ways in which we were going to deliver 1140 hours ahead of time. And we took cognizance of the fact that we needed to make sure that the Scottish Government guidelines were upheld. So we looked at eligible families, we looked at vulnerability, and we looked at rurality. We also looked to make sure that wherever we put in 1140 hours early, that there was no detriment to our partners, because it's very important that our partners remain in partnership with us. So at this point in time, we have 29 out of the 49 local authority settings already delivering 1140 hours early. 15 of those settings are within locations which provide 1140 hours entitlement to all families within a locality, and that's given us a good indication of how that's going to work. Those areas are within Highland Perthshire, Alyth, Cooper Angus, Strathtay, and one centre within Perth City. We also have 14 settings which are delivering 1140 hours to children who are eligible for that entitlement, and that's within those areas of vulnerability, including Perth City, Perth North, some areas in Kinross, and from January we'll be introducing that entitlement in Crieff.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Simpson, followed by Councillor Beard.
Thank you very much indeed, Vice Convener. This may appear a parochial question, but it does have wider connotations, I think. I'm looking at page 178 in relation to Scone, and I note that the Honeypot Nursery in Scone certainly will be ceasing to provide a service sometime soon. And I just wanted an assurance that the centralised system can cope with that, and we have no trouble in making sure there is sufficient space for these Scone children or the people who attend in Scone. But also perhaps a wider resilience question, that there is the funded providers could come and go a little bit. And do we have a plan B or even a plan Z in place for when the funded providers or others are no longer available?
To answer the first part of your question, Councillor Simpson, there is a plan in place, and there is the resilience and the capacity within the early learning communities that have been established, notwithstanding the closure of that particular centre. The reality is for us that partners come and go, and have done pre even the delivery of 600 hours. During the time we've been delivering 600 hours, and that will continue to be the case. And so contingency planning is part and parcel of the wider expansion programme.
Okay, Councillor Simpson. Thank you. Councillor Baird, followed by Councillor Anderson.
Thank you very much. I welcome this report, and there's a lot of information here which I hope will make it clear to parents how they're going to apply. So my question relates to, once a child has been allocated a place in a nursery school, very quickly these children move on to primary school, and there's always the presumption that the parents have fully understood that entry to a nursery
The microphone's going off.
my voice is going to. They sign that they accept the conditions, but I wonder if there should be two signatures. One, that you fully understand that your child is only at the nursery and does not mean entry to primary school, rather than just signing it once and the first bit's kind of been forgotten about. Because the person who sat on appeals subcommittee, it's quite harrowing when they come and tell you, but I never saw that, no one told me, so just seek for reassurance.
Your point is well made, Councillor Baird, in that we can explain and be very clear, and people will accept that that is the case. And then as time moves on, perhaps that may not be so prominent in some people's mind that is in fact the case. So we try to be as robust and as fair as possible in terms of the information that is providing and ensuring, but we'll take into account what you're suggesting there.
Supplementary.
Councillor Baird, yes, please.
I just wondered how this ballot works, and it says the parents are invited, so can you just explain logistics if the names go in a hat and they're pulled out? Or
As someone who used to perform the ballot, I could explain, but that wasn't today or yesterday, as my mother would always remind me, so I'm going to ask somebody who's much more familiar with the current practice to give you that explanation.
Sorry. In terms of the ballot process, going forward it is centralised, so the allocations done centrally will be given to the school, so a list of names to be balloted will be given to head teachers. The parents of those children will be invited into the school, and it is a names out of the hat situation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Anderson, followed by Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I too would welcome this excellent report, and 1140 hours is obviously going to help those that need to go out and work and sustain their lifestyle. This question I'm asking, I don't think there's much about it in the report, but it gives me concern, and it concerns the sustainability grants, which have a ceiling of £750 at the moment. In view of the increase to 1140 hours, can I ask if the sustainability grant ceiling is now fit for purpose for funded providers that are not for profit? Should it be reviewed with perhaps an increase to support small rural nurseries, playgroups? This would help these non-profit making groups that serve those that many can only afford the 1140 hours only.
I'll ask if Sian wants to make any comment in relation to that.
The sustainability grants that you're referring to, Councillor Anderson, is not part of the early learning and childcare funding, so it's not something that we have direct control over. However, we are aware of a number of voluntary organisations and playgroups who are in partnership with us, who really do want to continue with that partnership and to move into providing at 1140 hours. So the help that we have available for those playgroups and voluntary organisations is support in kind. As you know, all providers of 1140 will have to adhere to the national standard, and that requires a contract, and that includes childminders as well. We've invested quite significantly at the centre to support voluntary organisations, playgroups, childminders, through some central team support to support them to look at their business model. So some of the central staff within ECS will go and work with voluntary organisations to look at their financial viability, to provide business advice and support, and also to make sure that they are included in all of the partnership work to attract people to use their services. In terms of funding, that's as much as we can do within our guidelines, but we always continue to work with partner providers who meet the standard, and that support, I think, has been quite welcomed by partners who are in partnership with us.
Thank you for that, and maybe we can have discussions about a particular one later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor McDade, followed by Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I absolutely welcome the paper and the expansion of 1140, and particularly in Highland. It's been a real success at Lockery, which was the first one to get the 45-week placement, and where we currently have no private provision and a very poor, I think we have one childminder for the whole of Lockery. And my question actually is around how are we getting on with childminder recruitment, because that was obviously a key thing at the start of this process, as we were talking about. We were going to do a significant amount of expansion of childminder recruitment. There is still a dearth, as to my knowledge, in the rural areas, of childminders, and that's certainly the feedback I get from parents. And are we providing, for example, rural training and stuff for childminders in rural areas? So that's my question.
The number of childminders has increased, albeit still relatively small. There are big decisions actually to be made for individual childminders as to whether it's something that they want to provide, taking account of the answer that Sharon Johnson just provided to Councillor Anderson, is there's a national standard to meet, a contract to engage in, and therefore it's quite a different proposition actually for a number of childminders to that they might have set out to do. I think it's fair to say that we have and continue to have a very positive relationship with childminders locally who are continue to be grateful for the kind of support and training that is offered regularly. So it's something that we will continue to work with. In terms of the very specific numbers, I don't know if Sharon has that detail and able to provide that, but I do know that there are more who have indicated that coming into partnership is something that they're interested in.
Councillor McDade, we've had a really slow start with childminders, and as our Executive Director said, childminders have had a difficult decision to make in relation to how they're going to adapt to the demands that 1140 hours has brought. However, we have had some success over the last couple of years in working with our childminders. There are over 200 childminders within Perth and Kinross. They're not all evenly spread, and there are a dearth of childminders within Highland area. And we've been working hard to try and support childminders and people who would wish to start a business in that area to make that leap, because there is a definite need for childminders. We've just recently this week appointed an officer who's going to work full-time to support childminders, and we've had a number of roadshows and training sessions with childminders, and we've now had a further 27 childminders who have said they want to come into partnership with us. And one of the other, I suppose, activities that I'm particularly keen to get started on once we do have more childminders in partnership with us is where we have children with additional support needs or children who are looked after, for whom a nursery setting for 1140 hours isn't suitable. We want to encourage childminders who we're calling community childminders who can work with a nursery to provide a home setting and a nursery setting for children who can't sustain a full-time nursery place. So we've now got 27 partners who are interested, and we're not jumping all over them, but we're very keen to get them involved with us, and the appointment of a childminding development officer I think is going to help us tremendously there.
I think that's really positive, and I certainly welcome particularly what you're talking about of having a partnership approach between childminders and nurseries, and I was going to ask about that. I do think, my concern that I raised back in September 2017 was around a heavy reliance of childminders, particularly in the rural areas, and that we might need to step up rural provision from the state side to compensate for that. And obviously we've got low grade coming online, and that will be really welcome. And I think just we need to watch whether we might need to step in other locations as well. But thank you very much for the update.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question is very, very similar to the previous question from Councillor McDade. I suspect the answer will be the same. It's regarding staffing and resources. So in my ward in Errol, the after-school club closed down, and the reason it closed was because they simply couldn't get the qualified staff. So I'm wondering if there is a shortage of qualified staff. I think they're called early years practitioners, or they were simply nursery nurses back in my day. And if there is there anything we can do to change that, or is that just simply lack of training places that are available?
Councillor Forbes is aware of the situation in your ward area, and of course that particular group was not one that was providing early learning and childcare, the 1140 hours. That was linked to out with school provision. In terms of the staff, just today I saw on our ERIC intranet the Inside News Bulletin advertising again the opportunity for any member of staff who currently works for the council who may wish to retrain and have a career in early years. And we've had considerable success with our Learn to Work in Early Years programme, which replicates the one we have for Learn to Teach. And so I had the pleasure of being at Perth College graduation recently and see our first cohort of people crossing the stage, receiving their diplomas, now that they will move from the jobs that they had in the council into early learning and childcare. We also took an approach a couple of years ago to over-recruit, to enable some of the pilot work that Sharon has outlined already to take place, because we knew we would need more staff if we were bringing in more children. And to date, we have been successful in terms of our recruitment. However, it would be fair to say that not just in Perth and Kinross, but nationally, something like the recruitment of the additional amount of staff that is required to deliver expansion at this scale is something that is being kept under very close watch and scrutiny.
Thank you. Councillor McEwen.
Thank you very much. It's very evident from this report that an awful lot of work has been gone in by our officers in bringing forward what is a very bold policy decision to introduce the 1140 hours. And I was quite glad to see that the policy for allocating places will be done on vulnerability and for the needs of the child. And this is mentioned a couple of times in the paper, and it will no longer be a catchment area type approach that will be used as we do with our schools and primary school and high schools. But when I got to Appendix 4 of the document on page 181, it seemed to revert back to being a catchment area style of assessment. So could I have a bit of clarity, please?
Councillor McEwen, it's never been the case that we've had catchment areas for early learning and childcare nursery provision, and we're not moving to having catchment areas. What we've described are what we're calling early learning communities. So within a geographical area, but it's not a catchment area, there will be a different offer available to parents, carers and families in terms of the kind of approach they want. So some might want half days, some might want full days, some might want some time in a private provider, some time in a council nursery, some time with a childminder. And so there is a blend of different provisions within each of these communities that we have established, but they're not catchments, it's just a name that we've given to them.
Councillor McEwen.
I'll go into my set. That doesn't answer my question. It doesn't explain Appendix 4 in the paper, which talks about prioritisation and how people will be assigned places, and it talks about children residing in the ELC community and people outside the community, and people. To me, that's a catchment area process, not a what is the needs of that kind of process. It's
not. I would need to stress that it's absolutely not a catchment area. Catchment areas are defined by statutory process in legislation, and they're absolutely not a catchment area. They are areas that we have in response to the work that's been undertaken by officers in conjunction with feedback from parents as well. And Sharon can perhaps come in and say a bit more, but it's absolutely not about catchment areas. There are no catchment areas for early learning and childcare provision.
Councillor McEwen, Appendix 2 of the paper actually describes the early learning and childcare communities that we're referring to, and these are geographical areas, and the thinking behind the way that we are allocating places is to give as wide a choice to parents across a geographical area for choosing their nursery setting. So as the Executive Director said, we've got every single learning community will have at least one setting from a local authority that will provide 50 weeks a year provision. And then there will also be a range of settings providing 45 weeks a year, term time places or partner providers and childminders. What we heard back from parents and the community was the importance of making sure that once a child received a a nursery place. And that could be within their geographical area from where they live, but it might be where their parents work. So there's freedom across any geographical area for any parent to choose any nursery within Perth and Kinross. So they're not tied to a geographical area. But what parents said to us was that what they wanted was, once a child was settled within a nursery setting, say at anti-preschool, then they wanted to make sure that that pattern of attendance was able to be continued the following year. So the criteria for attendance at nursery is taking all of that into account. So we have got prioritisation, if you like, for the patterns of attendance, maybe more than attendance at a particular nursery. So if someone wants full days rather than 5 mornings a week, we've got a set criteria of priorities for those parents. And as you rightly say, part of that is about vulnerability. So parents who require to have the same settings and the same routine, then they're high on our list. And then those children who have had that previous attendance pattern for the year before, and their parents have then gone into work, training or study as a result of that, they will want to continue with that. So the criteria for attendance is really more about the patterns of attendance, because there are so many now to choose from, rather than perhaps attendance at a nursery.
Thank you. That was clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rebick, you've indicated to come back in. Does anybody else have any other questions after Councillor Rebick? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. It was just a brief one, and I think Councillor McEwen's broad point about vulnerability is well made. I think as a council we have been very cognizant of that aspect of vulnerability, and I do like this idea of childminders and local nurseries working together where there may be some measure of additional need. And if my questions crass and inappropriate at this stage, I will apologise in advance, but will we pay the childminders a little bit more for that service?
Yes, we are looking at that as a business case, Councillor Rebick, because what will ultimately happen is that childminders are businesses. If they're taking children with additional support needs, and it means that they can take less children because of the way that that child needs to be supported, then we would expect to pay them a higher rate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't think there are any more questions, so I'll move to the report. The report details the updated policy and guidelines for admission to early learning and childcare settings for 2021, managed or funded by the Education and Children's Services. It sets out clearly and comprehensively the proposed new policy and guidance which will come into force in August 2020, following the expansion to an entitlement of 1,140 hours. It also sets out the ELC community structure for the delivery of the new model and the process by which parents and carers can apply for a place in preparation for the August 2020 deadline. I'm sure parents will welcome the extended lead-in time for the allocation of places, meaning that the result of applications will be made known between January and May and well in advance of the relevant start date for the child. The guidance also clearly sets out the eligibility criteria dependent on dates of birth and provides helpful timeline summary of the various procedural stages for the allocation of places and details of the priority admissions categories. Convener, I welcome the report and have much pleasure in moving acceptance of its recommendations. Do I have a seconder?
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Welcoming this updated report, and thank our officers for demonstrating a degree of agility in managing what is quite a complex. I think any of us that have used childcare know the requirement to be creative and look for approaches that will benefit as many people as possible is not always easy. On an entirely separate but not unrelated note, I was encouraged to read in the local press the reports from officers about progress in the physical buildings that work that's had to be carried out across Perth and Kinross in order to meet deadlines. There's quite a lot of deadlines that officers have had to meet, and I think if we could take back thanks to the people that Greg Boland and his team and others who've been working so hard to deliver that aspect of the expansion of early learning and childcare as well, that'd be really helpful. So in seconding the report, once again, and it's been the theme of this afternoon, is thanking our officers that deliver all of this work, and we'll look forward to seeing how these new partnerships between private providers and ourselves and childminders and develop as the rollout continues. So, thank you, Councillor Duff.
Are there any comments in the report? Councillor Epic.
Thank you again, Vice Convener. This is a great report. I've bored everybody in the past, so I'll try not to do it too much again around the benefits. I do believe this is a fantastic policy. I think it's backed up by £17 million, I think, from Scottish Government, so it is really important, both in terms of mitigating the worst effects of in-work poverty and a lot of the early interventions that we speak about in all these committees. I think this is a great living example of it, and I will give the Executive Director notice that I will plagiarise her comment. I think it is easier to build strong children than to mend broken men or women, and I think free childcare for all 2 and 3-year-olds, for all 3 and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds will be the most important of early interventions. I think the ability to learn through play should not be undervalued, and I hope that it means that children of all backgrounds will be ready for school when they do so in the early years of primary. Like any great policy, it means nothing if it's not implemented well, and it is really important that we commend Sharon Johnson, Greg Boland and the rest of their colleagues. I know this has been a hard, big piece of work to do, but I think we're in a good place where we are. I think as the policy goes forward there will be gaps, but I think we're in a good place to identify those gaps and deal with them as they come about. So yeah, I think the flexibility of approach has been mentioned before between school nurseries, partner providers and childminders is really important, and again I'm encouraged with the discussions today that we're going along the right lines. So we are absolutely delighted to commend this paper, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Rebick. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'm going to just go back for a couple of seconds to the staffing issues that I raised earlier, and in Errol, and Sheena, as she always is, was absolutely right. That's not exactly the same situation, but it does all nonetheless come down to staffing resources, and what the people of Errol don't know about that situation is it was the staff from this council that kept the club going and managed it to bring it to a successful conclusion, which can hopefully be restarted again very time soon. So on behalf of the people of Errol, I would like to thank the staff of Perth Kinross for doing that. This has been described by our colleagues down the table as a bold move, and Councillor Rebick will be very surprised to hear me agreeing with them. I think, however, and there's always a however, I suspect that when the Scottish Government come to do a final review of this, I suspect they'll say it was a bold move, but we probably didn't plan properly for the staff resources that were required for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Are there any other comments?
I would like to make a comment as an unelected member and lay person. I just think this is amazing.
Thank you very much. Thank you. If there are no other comments, can we agree the report? Agreed. Thank you. Convener?
That brings us to the end of this afternoon. You're all looking at the clock in amazement. That brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much to everyone for participation. Thank you.